A few months ago, Frank Miller released Ronin Rising in a collected edition. This is a sequel to his original miniseries Ronin that came out 40 years ago. And I forgot what happened here, so I decided that before I read the sequel, that I would read the original again. And I'll just give some thoughts about the book in general in case you haven't read it, and why I got the sequel and my thoughts about that. So let's go. So Ronin, okay, we're going back to some ancient history. This is over 40 years ago. Frank Miller became one of the hottest people in American comics due to his run on Daredevil. And his original run on Daredevil kind of redefined American comics because back before him, everybody was doing the Stan Lee, Roy Thomas, very wordy comics where the writers thought that they were actual, like, Ernest Hemingway, John Steinbeck, Norman Mailer type of writers. And they weren't writing for comic books. And so they were just all this dialogue and very wordy and all this stuff. And he created what is a cinematic approach. He was the first one to limit the amount of dialogue, let the storytelling tell the story. He also made Daredevil grim and gritty. I remember back in the day when I was reading comics when I was a teenager, Daredevil and John Byrne and Chris Claremont's X-Men were the two hottest comics around, at least from Marvel, maybe just around. And I used to always read Daredevil first when it came in. You'd read it in 5 minutes because there wasn't a lot of dialogue. It was just the images could tell the story. And you read it in 5 minutes and then you couldn't wait another month until the next issue. So after that success of Daredevil, Frank Miller signed this big deal to go to DC. And this was the first thing that Frank Miller came out with, this miniseries called Ronin. Now, Ronin is set in a near future. It starts off in feudal Japan, where there is this masterless samurai, which is a Ronin, whose master is killed by this demon. And he goes and he kills the demon, and basically the demon, he has a magic sword, and the sword gets energy from killing and the blood of evil people, but it gets its full power from getting the blood of an innocent person. And actually, if that sounds like Samurai Jack, this Ronin is one of the influences, one of the things that led to the creation not only of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but also Samurai Jack. And I love Samurai Jack. So anyway, long story short, he finds the demon, and to kill him, he stabs himself and the demon because he's innocent, he's pure. And so the demons sends themselves in the future. Now, you have what you call near future New York. This is 21st century New York. And back then, it was much a trope that New York City was a decaying city, and therefore would just kind of keep decaying and keep decaying. They didn't expect Mayor Bloomberg to gentrify the city and clean it up and stop this decline, because the subways were dangerous. There was a lot of crime. All those movies about grim and gritty New York were not really far from the truth. So it takes place in the near future. There's this company is creating this this cybernetic type of thing where it kind of grows, and it's trying to improve the city, and it's growing. And basically this whole plot line is that the person that's driving this engine is a young boy, I guess, or maybe he's a teenager who doesn't have any limbs, but he's like a super brain, almost like a Charles Xavier kind of thing. And so the Ronin and the demon come back into this current time, and they're looking for him. And at the same time, the demon takes the over the body of the person that's running this whole, kind of like this machinery that therefore is going to revitalize New York. So long story short, there's a lot of I would say martial arts, not so much martial arts films, but I would say a lot more Japanese film influences in this. And one ongoing subplot is that as the Ronin is makes an ally with this woman, and they're gonna fight this demon, and basically the AI that is also powering this machine. You wonder, like, is the Ronin real or is it imaginary? Is it real or imaginary? And it kind of flip back and forth. So anyway, at the end, of course, they destroy the being, and then it ends. And it sort of ends like maybe there's a movie that came out 15, 20 years ago, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, that kind of ended and kind of almost had an open ending, almost like a fable. And this is how it ends. So this was not really that well received. I think I'm reading it now, it wasn't bad, it's ambitious, but everybody's expecting Frank Miller to do a superhero type of gig. And so the sales of this were so-so. So the next big thing he did was The Dark Knight Returns. And actually, I remember talking to my comic shop owner at that time in the 80s, and he told me that the first volume sold out. And the reason why it sold out was that the orders of Batman Dark Knight Returns #1 were low because the sales of Ronin were low, so people really didn't think that Frank Miller was going to be able to boost sales. And Frank Miller redefined comics, American comics, with that one. And the Batman you see today is still just a slight variation of the one that Frank Miller came out with in 1987. So as I said, this is an interesting book. You know, Frank Miller was still in his prime at this time. Story is interesting. I don't think it's his best work. I think that was probably I think Electra Assassin was better than this. Obviously, The Dark Knight Returns better than this, but he was trying to do something that was non-superhero, mixing sci-fi, Japanese lore, and he stole a lot from manga and kung fu movies for Daredevil and all that. So he was just doing this like a passion project, but it really didn't take off that well. And the ending was kind of nebulous, like, well, you know, because the end you're like, well, is the Ronin, I guess he's real, but we don't know if he's real, and it ends. So it's, if you're interested in reading Frank Miller's work at this time, and as much as I think that Frank Miller is not really a great person, last 20, 30 years have kind of shown that. I think at this time in the 80s was what you call peak Frank Miller. And you can say, you know, Sin City was the early 90s, but this period of 80s Frank Miller was really like his creative peak, in my opinion. So this isn't a bad read. You can, if you read Daredevil and then you read this, you can kind of see the progression to Dark Knight Returns. Although this is really different than Daredevil and Dark Knight Returns. He tried to do something different and didn't catch on. So I read this, and then I picked this up. This is Ronin Rising. This was a 6-issue miniseries. Let me zoom in a little bit. From the Frank Miller Presents line. The only reason I picked this up was because Colin on one of his preview videos several months ago mentioned this, and this was collected in two forms. One, a very large, oversized $40 hardcover collection, and it was also came out the same time in this $12.99 manga version. And so I was really curious, one, to read it, and two, I really like the idea of coming out with a book and saying, hey, look, this is something that might appeal to manga readers. So we're going to have the big, nice deluxe edition for the comic book, real Frank Miller diehard nerds that want to have that nice looking book. But we're also going to come out with a manga-sized version and see people that read manga, the younger readers, will get into this. And it's $12.99. It's almost 300 pages. It actually has a dust jacket, which was kind of wild. So for the price, this is the dust jacket here. This is what the book looks like. So, you know, this is the Philip Tan artwork for the cover, and this is Frank Miller. Frank Miller now, which is not Frank Miller then. So I figured, yeah, you know, it might be interesting to read. You know, this is kind of a cool experiment because for $12.99, which is not a lot of money, you can read this collection and we'll see what it's like. So I did pick this up. I did read this. And it's really not very good. The art, I think Philip Tan does most of the pencils, although there's a couple of issues that Frank Miller does, so the difference in style is a little jarring. Now, Philip Tan is not a bad artist, and you can tell that he came from that Image Founders School, and I think I read that he did some issues of Spawn as part of, as part of his resume. So basically, the whole story of this takes place sometime after the events of Ronin. This is the same character that teams up and falls in love with the Ronin in the first book. She's with this child called Billy, and basically it's her kid. And basically they decided to go and defeat this evil AI that's called Virgo. It was called Virgo in the first book, and they're going to defeat it because it's going to cause war. Now, she's become she was head of security for this rich guy in the first book, and now she's like some super badass warrior, and her son is like this little kid that she has like in a backpack and like in a basket, like you have like in I guess in Japanese like cartoons or maybe real life they carry them like this. But this kid's like a little kid, but he's like super powered. He's like a super powerful mutant, if you want to use X-Men terminology. And they're going through this kind of gauntlet because they're going to go finally take out Virgo and destroy Virgo before she can destroy the world. Like I said, the art isn't bad. This evil Virgo has been fighting the Ronin for years and finally takes Ronin over. So they're trying to save him and defeat her. And so, this is the kid, Billy, who's named after Billy because apparently this woman had a child with the Ronin, and the Ronin is really like a combination of the Ronin from 800 years ago and this Billy guy who powered this whole machinery. So he's like a kid who's like a super powered mutant. This book is just really boring because it just seems to go nowhere. Like so much space is so much space is dedicated to such really little story. If you've ever read a Jonathan Hickman or Brian Michael Bendis book where you give them 30 pages and like maybe they could have done everything they did in 30 pages, they could have done it like in 4 or 5. This is what it's like. Just on and on and on. And there's just a lot of repetitive dialogue. Like she's talking to Billy. She's like, okay, don't be brave. Don't be scared. I won't be scared, Mama. I won't be scared. It's like the same thing over and over and over again. And this is a 6-issue miniseries. I know everybody does a 6-issue miniseries, so they have a tray they can put out. But I mean, this could have been done in like 2-3 issues max. Just a lot of just very redundant, very slow, very just like get on with it. There's just nothing going on. Like I said, it's like a Jonathan Hickman book. Like if you read any of his comics lately, it's the same thing as like nothing's happening. I mean, it's a great gig. You make up enough story for 2 issues and then you break it out into 8 and then you get paid for 8 when you only did the work for 2. But basically they go there and it's really strange here because you have these first 3 chapters with Philip Tan's work, and he's got an interesting style, and then issue 4 is Frank Miller's work. So stylistically it's a huge change. It's just really different. And then like book 5 is Philip Tan's work again, and I'll be honest with you, I read the first 2 chapters of this and I was just bored out of my mind. It was like nothing going on. So eventually I just kind of flipped through it and I went to the end. This is what I call my favorite thing is Monsters Volume 2 lesson, where I read that book. I didn't like the book, but I kept thinking it's going to turn around, it's going to turn around, it's going to turn around, it's going to end satisfactorily. It did not. I thought that book was beautifully drawn, but the story and the writing were terrible, with big holes left. I just thought it was the art was not lazy, the writing was lazy. And this is a lot like it, except the art in Emil Ferris's book is infinitely better. I just got bored with it, and it's like, you know what, I'm not going to read 4 more chapters of this, and just, I don't think this thing's going to turn around. So I flipped through the end, and the thing is, the end is a jip, because the end, yeah, they I guess destroy this evil AI Virgo, and and in the end is like, oh, the screams carry on through the night, screams of an old sad world dying and of a new world being born. A thousand trials await, a thousand perils, but we'll survive them and we'll fight on. So like it really doesn't end. It's just kind of like, okay, we defeated it, and all right, well, it's like the first book. It's like a jip. There's like really no conclusion, and this is something. And I'm sorry to sound kind of harsh, but I'm just gonna be honest here. Like I try to be. I think all great writers have a shelf life, and I don't mean just great comic book writers. I mean all writers. I mean, and they can keep writing books, selling books way past their shelf life due date. Like Stephen King, some of his books in the 70s and 80s, I think, were his best work, but he's been selling books forever. And I see this in comics a lot. You had somebody that had something really interesting to say back in the day, but as the years go on, maybe the ideas are as fresh, maybe they just change stylistically, whatever it is. Frank Miller, this story is very limited. The writing is boring. I guess he can afford to do it because he's rich, and he's not like gotta sell copies to make a ton of money. This is more like an ego project. I think as a sequel, this is just padded. And at the end of the day, it's a sequel, but it's really not a sequel. It's just a continuing story, because at the end, okay, they defeat this monster, but now we got a lot of new stuff to worry about. So there could be maybe another sequel and another sequel. I just think it's just not written very good. Philip Tan's art is really good. I liked it. But I mean, I'm going to compare this to like Monica that Dan Klaus came out with in 2023. That book is like maybe 105, 110 pages max. And he told a hell of a lot of story in those slightly over 100 pages. And this is like 200 and something pages. And it's like honestly, the story could have been told like maybe with this many pages, maybe half. And again, it's just, Frank Miller just not really doing interesting stuff now. I mean, I didn't read any of these Dark Knight Returns sequels. I know the second one was really terrible back 20 years ago. The third one I heard wasn't good. I mean, he just got a name, but I mean, he's not doing anything interesting. And I bought it more because I was curious about the product placement of this, and I thought it was a great idea. But I mean, in a world where you have great manga coming out of Japan, you can't put this alongside the shelf and expect people to say, hey, this is great. This is just really bleh. And it's a shame, but I mean, I don't feel too bad for Frank Miller, because Frank Miller showed himself being an Islamophobe. He talked a lot of crap about the people who were doing Occupy Wall Street. He's never apologized for any of those things. And all he said is like, I really don't know what was in my mind at the time. So he's never really apologized. So I was just looking at this more like artistically, like saying, this is a cool package. I wonder if you kind of almost reinvent yourself with it for a younger crowd, but you got to do better than this. So I would say that unless you're a real diehard Frank Miller fan, I would probably skip reading this. And if you're a Frank Miller fan as a diehard and you have never read this, you may want to pick it up at your library like I did. I will tell you that Elektra Assassin's better. His first Daredevil run is better. I think probably his second Daredevil run might be better. Sin City, I think, might be better. Maybe it's just a different kind of story. But like this is just yeah. So I read 2 chapters worth. I'm not going to read anymore. I'm not going to spend that time reading 4 additional chapters when I got really excellent comics waiting for me to read. And that's really my very honest insight. Don't know if you have read this at all, or this. If you have any comments or if you have anything you want to share, please let me know. I'd appreciate it. And thank you very much.